the Martinus Cosmology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the writings and the world picture of Martinus, a Danish spiritual writer. My name is Mary McGovern, and I'm your host for today. I'm very happy to be joined today by two guests. One is Søren Grint, who many of you know already, he's guested this podcast before. And the other one is new to this podcast, Tobias Ankerstrip. You're here for the first time, Tobias?
I am.
Tobias is a medical doctor working here in Denmark, and he's also a Reiki master and a researcher who is, among other things, done research into near-death experiences. And that's going to be the subject of our podcast today, near-death experiences and reincarnation. Tobias has also been the driving force behind establishing a Danish network for people who've had near-death experiences. And I'll put a link to that network in the show notes. So welcome, Søren and Tobias.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy Tobias, to be here. Those who know Søren already know he's a psychologist from Sweden, now living in Denmark, and he's the author of 3 books based on Martinus's world picture. Unfortunately, none of them are available in English yet. And for that reason, I'm very happy that we can talk about the content of your latest book, Reincarnation, A Loving and Logical View of Life, in English. So welcome to you both. So, Tobias, you've been doing research into near-death experiences. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your research, how you have been studying near-death experiences.
Yeah, sure. So basically, research in near-death experiences is a field that's around 45 years old, like systematically researching near-death experiences, and that primarily started in the United States. And in Denmark, the research that's been done is extremely sparse. I think I'm probably the only one that has been conducting sort of systematic interviews and research on the subject in Denmark, and most of our data is not published yet, but it's underway. And I've spent most of my time interviewing people who have had near-death experiences. And then I've also conducted a survey with cardiac arrest survivors to inquire whether they had a near-death experience and how that experience had been for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also been talking quite a lot with other researchers that's related, that's researching cardiac arrest patients, cardiac arrest survivors, and like discuss with them how these experiences is also relevant. And I mean, most cardiologists and researchers into cardiology are not even aware that this phenomenon can happen. And I think it's a major thing to look after. And be aware of in certain cases, So mainly my research has been in doing qualitative interviews with near-death experiences,
Mm-hmm. And how many cases have you looked at in Denmark?
I think maybe 20 cases or so.
Okay.
The biggest issue with the recent near-death experience research in Denmark is that it's really difficult to find funding for it. And I think that's a great question that we might discuss as well this morning, that these topics that are kind of on the borderline of science and faith, you could say, I mean, some sort of paranormal phenomenon to some degree at least, kind of sometimes has a hard time finding funding, right? Because it's not really directly conventional research. Mm-hmm. So most of my time as a researcher, I've actually spent in a more broad area, investigating the relationships between faith and health and existential and spiritual needs, both of patients and in the general population.
Yeah. And Søren, you have written a book about reincarnation, and the title in English would be Reincarnation, a Loving and Logical View of Life. The idea of reincarnation is maybe associated with near-death experiences. I know there are some researchers in America Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson, when he was alive, were doing some research into children who remembered what they assumed were previous lives. So there's been some connection between the idea of reincarnation and near-death experiences. So what sparked your interest in reincarnation and your enthusiasm for writing a book about it?
Well, I met the reincarnation thought as a 17 years old guy, and I was a materialist thinking, and that reincarnation seemed logical for me, and so something in my emotional or intuitive aspect could grasp that as the truth. But then I later was kind of provoked that it was also a spiritual worldview connected. And then I started to study it more deep. And then I was very inspired by Martinus' works about this topic. And then I studied psychology and became a psychologist. And then I had this split in my consciousness. I read one life theory psychology at the university, and then I had my interest in spiritual matters. So early in my work life, I started really have this urge that I want to connect these two worlds. And that's why I started to write books about the topic. So I wrote 2 books first about personal development and psychology with a spiritual perspective, a reincarnation perspective. But then, as you say, Tobias, there has been since the 70s science about near-death experiences, and also Ian Stevenson's reincarnation science. So there's a growing number of people that investigate and publish a lot of facts about near-death experiences and reincarnation. So I thought it would be interesting for me to write a book about reincarnation and connect it with near-death experiences and this science about in different areas that shows that consciousness is not in the brain. So many areas in this borderline science shows us that this brain is more like a filter where the big consciousness is channeled into this physical realm to be able to handle this body and sort out all the impressions that otherwise would overwhelm our consciousness. So this book is kind of try to build a bridge from psychology to spiritual science.
Mm.
Yeah.
And can I just respond?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yes, yeah. I can really relate to your stories on because obviously, so as you mentioned, Mary, I'm trained as a medical doctor, and I also had this kind of it's actually a very existential clash, right? It's two completely seemingly opposingly worldviews that kind of grows and builds in you at the same time. And on the one hand, you have a lot of experience and you know a lot of different things that are true on one hand, and then you have an intuitive understanding that there are other truths as well that aren't grasped by this other worldview, right? And I think also this complementary view is by far the most relevant and loving and rational view, as you mentioned as well. It has the biggest potential, and I think by combining these worldviews, I think everything becomes possible, basically, rather than limited. And I think that's what I'm trying to do myself, at least. But I think it's really been a huge conflict for me as well, and also, I mean, sitting here in this podcast as both a medical doctor and as a Reiki practitioner and a researcher, I mean, I have a lot of different caps on my head with different knowledge, and some of the things that I will probably comment on is on my own personal understanding and experience, and other is related to research, right, and other yet again to clinical experience. So it's a combination of a lot of things.
Yes,
and I think you can probably relate to that as well.
Yes, and the need to have a much more broad, open space when you meet clients, for instance.
Yes.
So many of my colleagues in the psychiatry, they would never talk about spiritual matters with their clients. They thought that was a private thing.
Yes.
But I realized when I was talking to people that they had so many existential and also religious questions.
Yes.
So for me, I also made it like a scanning also when I met a new client. What's your worldview? Because if they think in reincarnation, that's could help them. As you mentioned, these two word pictures. The one is in a way without meaning, without purpose. The materialistic there's no purpose with life. But if you have a reincarnation or other spiritual views, you are searching for a meaning, a purpose. Why is this happening to me? And of course, many people in these crises in life, they need a purpose. And so I scan all my clients. Where are you in your worldview?
Yeah.
And their worldview have to decide where we'll put the discussion, so to say.
Yeah.
But if you say no to all the spiritual stuff, you will not have the resources needed that could help many people.
Yes.
So, I guess that's your science about fate and illnesses have been showing also.
Yes, definitely. And it's quite interesting also because I think there needs in my experience at least, there needs to be some sort of balance, right? Because both worlds can kind of close in on themselves, right? If you're only acting in the spiritual, religious world, then it can be very contemplative, and it can be difficult to have direction in the physical world as well, right? Because that's where the materialistic world really excels. It's how to be in the world, how to get food, how to get shelter. I mean, stuff like these kind of things that are also necessary for the human experience. So I think the balance is definitely needed.
Yes.
But
and I've read quite a lot about near-death experiences, and maybe Tobias, you could explain what a near-death experience is. But and one thing I have read is that people come out of a near-death experience often with a sense of a meaning in life.
So near-death experiences are a sort of experience, a subjective experience that people can have when they are physically or perceived close to death. So that can be, and then they can recall this certain experience afterwards, and retell it, right? So it is a very heterogeneous field because it arises in every occasion where people are close to death, and even in situations where people only perceive themselves as being close to death. I mean, there's been numerous accounts of, for instance, car accidents where people, like the airbag blows, and people think they have a near-death experience, but then when they come back to like regain consciousness in their body, then I mean they had no physical damage whatsoever. I mean nothing really happened with their body, and even specific meditational states or specific states of consciousness gained through recreational drug use, stuff like that, has near-death experience like content, right? So it's a very heterogeneous field, and it can happen both in, I mean, everywhere where people are near death, right, are dying. So car accidents, suicide attempts, cardiac arrests, infections in the brain, different things. So it's a really difficult field to study systematically as well, because the population, the sample is very heterogeneous.
And it's across all cultures and all worldviews.
Yes, so it's a phenomenon that's we can date it as far as back as we have written sources. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, Plato's writings, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, numerous writings since we have written sources from humans. Right, there are accounts of near-death experience, and they are all across the world, as you say, in all different kind of cultures, all different kind of religious views. There's various differences between the content, but usually the main issue, the main parts of this, the content, so to say, is similar across cultures and countries.
So what's the typical content of a near-death experience?
Yeah, and then we'll take out the Grayson near-death experience scale, right? Because he's the grand old man of near-death experiences, Bruce Grayson, who developed the near-death experience scale in 82 or 83, I think. And he made 16 questions that kind of describes and characterizes the near-death experiences. It has 4 categories. So there are like cognitive aspects, which are sort of things that your thoughts go quicker, or time stops working. And there are affective aspects, affective meaning feelings, so usually feelings of intense pleasure or peace or love that are really otherworldly in their nature and ineffable. That's also, most people that I talk to, they can't really, words won't suffice in describing their experience. And then there are the paranormal aspects that are related to having a different perception, like sensual perception, and that relates to also the reincarnation thought that you were discussing, Søren, regarding the non-local consciousness, that people may have uncommon sensual perceptions, either that their senses get enhanced, that colors and sounds are altered, or that they are even able to sense things that are physically in another area than their physical body. And that really challenges some foundational premises for natural science today. Like the main paradigm today is that, as you mentioned, Søren, that the brain produces consciousness, but and then if the brain stops working, then consciousness is obviously gone. But if you are able to, through your cardiac arrest, when you completely have no consciousness and the EEG line is flatly electronic activity of the brain is completely non-present, and then you are resuscitated, and you can relay a chat that 2 persons had in the canteen of the hospital, I don't know, 100 and 200 meters away, and that really challenges the thought that the brain produces consciousness, and really points to that it might be the other way around. Yeah, the consciousness can be somewhere else when the brain is closed off. And then there's the 4th aspect of the near-death experiences, the characteristic aspects, and that's the transcendental aspects. So that relates to being in a different otherworldly area, seeing otherworldly beings, spiritual beings, deceased relatives, or meeting like gods or some sort of source. That people usually describe it like that.
Yeah.
And it's very different how intense near-death experiences are. Most people that I talk to, they usually just see a light. Some see themselves from a vantage point, usually above their body, and that's the main things that I hear. And then the experience of peace and love. These the veridical perceptions of sensing things that happens other places while your body is dead, and also the transcendent elements, they are more rare. Yeah.
And Søren, how is it possible, according to Martinus's world picture, that you can experience life in a very vivid way? People say that it's a more real experience than ordinary life experience. How can you experience life when the brain is flatlined, the heart is flatlined, you are dead? You're could you explain that?
Yes. We'll try. I guess, as you said, Tobias, the key point is our consciousness the primary aspect, or the physical body? And I think everything of these details also you talk about that are kind of transcendent, and especially I would say that you could see your body from outside. You can see the operation. You can see your own body. I mean, how is that possible if the consciousness would not be the primary aspect of us, and the body more like a tool. So, and the fact, as you also took up here, that you could be on a totally other part of the world and see things. And there are so many documented things. So it seems like even though you're in operation, you maybe put something on the ears and tape your eyes, and everything is shut down, and the flatline and so on, then you still can have your senses. You see things, you experience things, and they say, I see 360 degrees. I see all the ways around me. So obviously there has to be something with our consciousness, the consciousness that is not dependent on the physical senses and the physical body. And so the senses is maybe more like, the physical sense is more like small apparatus in the physical tool we have. But the senses are really in a spiritual level. That's why you can sense in that area. And then you can ask, how is it possible for the consciousness to be non-local? Because all our natural science tells us there has to be a local place. You can measure and you can weigh it. But we do have experience of radio wavelengths and mobile telephone and photocells and so on. And we can have this radiant matter, so to say. And that's why Martinus says that the consciousness is built up by radiant matter. Our thoughts are radiant matter. Our feelings are radiant matters. When we are in the body, we experience them very physically with feelings. They are really present in the body, but we can also experience outside. And so it is matter, but it's radiant matter. It's not physical. And it's not bound to time and space. And then Martinus has this, he elaborates on the expression, the triune principle, and says that the consciousness has three main parts, you could say. It is an eternal I. We have an I within us, and it hasn't changed. When I was 10 years old and looked in the mirror, it was me. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, it's still me. But the body has changed, feelings has changed, thoughts has changed. So there's a stillness behind all movement. And there he says, well, that's an eternal aspect. And that is more real than the created parts, because it's the stillness, the fixed point behind all movement. And you can not say anything more about the I than that it is something that is. And he also says it's a divine something that is. And then he says the second part is the ability to create and to experience. And the third part is the creation. And it's very interesting with this second part that is so deeply elaborated in Martinus' works, that the fact that we have wishes, longing, will, all these desire for things, it is something totally fundamental. It is the force behind all movements. So if I move my arm or whatever I move, or thoughts or feelings, it is because I have a longing, I have a desire for something. And that is, in a way, I don't know if you could say that, but it's the hardcore of the hard question of consciousness, that there is something putting matter in motion, or feelings and emotions. So this second part, this ability to create and experience, is also an eternal part, because we can't start creation anywhere. It doesn't start with Big Bang or anything. It is an eternal aspect of life, and we are eternal beings. It is the created part that are temporal, and it's changing all the time. So he has this triune principle, and that's his way of explaining that we can experience life totally outside of the body. It's not, we are not dependent on a physical body. the fixed point is our eternal I and our ability and all the talents that we build up from lifetime to lifetime. That is an organic evolution that we can compare with Darwin's evolution. We are walking on the ladder of evolution.
Yeah. So, Tobias, when you did your research, you interviewed a lot of people who'd had near-death experiences. What did you learn from that?
I think I learned quite a lot, and I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert either. I mean, there are many researchers that has interviewed many more people than I have, but from the talks that I have had with people, I think it's also Denmark is a special context for this, because it's such a secular country, right, where people are really shameful and private about their beliefs and thoughts about existential thoughts. It's not really something that we share with each other if we're not really primed to that. So it's and I think that's a different discussion, that we've lost the existential and spiritual language. The vernacular has been lost. So, and that has numerous consequences that we can discuss elsewhere. But what they say is that, firstly, it's I've noted that I'm usually one of the few people that they have ever told the story. And I think that's quite extraordinary. I mean, I interview grown-up people, 50, 60 years old. They never even shared it with their spouses.
Yeah.
And I think that's just completely stunning to me.
Yeah, but typical.
And quite typical, yes.
Yes.
And sometimes when I do have talks or speak somewhere, people come up in the break and say, I had that experience once, and I really never told anyone about it, and I'm just so happy that you're putting words to this experience that I had, and I don't know who I can talk with it about it or something like that. And I think people are really afraid of being like ostracized or shunned out because of, I mean, it can be a quite intense existential spiritual experience, and it can be very difficult to integrate in your life if the rest of your surroundings are not really probed to that. I mean, if you have a spouse that are really materialist, atheist, or think such spiritual matters are nonsense and stupid, then it can be really difficult and very painful. And also you have so I've been mostly interested in the after effects that people describe, because I think the near-death experiences in themselves are really well described in the literature. I mean, Grayson and numerous other researchers has done a really good job at that. So I haven't been, and also as a Reiki master, I had a lot of personal experiences relating to these metaphysical questions that the near-death experiences answer. So I really found my own answers to that questions. So I've been really interested in the after effects and how we might care for them, care for the people that have these experiences in the healthcare system as well, because that is completely lacking at this moment. And what they describe as well is that they are usually completely changed, right? Have a more loving connection to people, have become more compassionate about other people, about nature, less interested in competition or materialistic things. But also this thing that it can be difficult, right? There are increased divorce rates among near-death experiences that I think reflects that issue.
Another aspect of the divorces is also that the personal change.
Yeah, exactly. The personal development. Yeah,
there's such an interesting example in the book After by Bruce Grayson. He gives many examples of that when they change so much in their personality, the spouse doesn't know, who am I married to?
Yes.
And there's this example with this guy that was more into criminal things and much of money and big cars. And after his near-death experiences, he wanted to serve people and be helpful. And she was so bored with that guy. He wasn't the tough guy she married, so she wanted a divorce.
Yes.
I mean, that's also kind of a problem when you go through such a very big change in your personality,
Yes.
how should your surrounding relate to this new person?
Exactly. And how should you relate to that new person yourself as well, right?
Yes, yes,
Because
Yes.
you had a
Yeah.
lot of attachment to a personality that you had before. I mean, your entire
yes,
life
yes,
is built up on certain premises and certain thoughts about yourself. I'm this and that. I do this and
yes.
that. I like this and this. And then instantly that changes. And I think that's also one of the things that are so interesting, that is so interesting with this experience, that it's an instant experience. It's not a personal development it is also a personal development that happens over decades, right?
Yes.
Like digesting the experience. But it's not like many other people, they have their own personal or spiritual growth happening over a number of years. That was my own
Yes.
experience as well. Quite intense years, I must say, but it's not like instantaneous like the near-death experiences.
Mm.
And as a
So
psychologist, I would like to find the method
yes,
Yes.
be so deeply changing a personality in
yes,
seconds or minutes or
yes,
so
Yeah.
for
yes,
me that is also proof that there is something really important going on. You
yes.
cannot say that it's
Hallucination.
Hallucinations.
hallucination
Yeah.
or other people going through traumas without a near-death experience, they often have more problems with
Yes.
anxiety and depression afterwards.
Yeah.
But these persons, they, even though it's a crisis to adjust your new personality,
Yeah.
they go really up on a much higher level when it comes to humaneness and awareness of other beings and the values of life.
Mm.
So it really shows that, for me, it shows that it's not something, it is really a dimension that they are have a contact with that does something with their structure. In this, in the interesting, as you mentioned before, it's also very interesting to see that people having strong spiritual awakening, they can go through similar changes.
Yes.
And then you must ask, why is it similar? It must be
Yes.
a connection between these two experiences.
Yes.
So in a way, it is a spiritual awakening going into near-death experience, but it could also be, as you said, meditation, or people, as Martinus would say, who have cosmic glimpses, or
Yeah.
that suddenly there is something in their consciousness structure that is changed. And from the point of Martinus, you would say that the body of feeling, the body of emotion, and the body of intuition is suddenly taking much more part of your personality.
Mm.
Because before it was more the physical aspect, the physical body and the physical values. And suddenly there are emotional, existential, and intuitive capacities also growing very strongly.
Yes.
And Martinus has this telling us about that we have, in fact, 6 bodies, not one body. The physical body is just an aspect of this, the 6 different bodies, and one is intuition and feeling. And I think they are really enhanced through spiritual awakening and also near-death experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're completely right. And I think, as you also point at, I mean, there would be a huge therapeutic potential, right, in being able to prescribe a near-death experience. And I think some of that effect is actually harnessed through the renaissance, you could say, of the psychedelic therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Use of LSD or psilocybin in psychiatric treatment, and that has really been growing actually quite a lot these last years.
Yes,
I mean, the major medical journals around the world, Journal of the American Medical Association, have numerous studies and reports on that. And so, I mean, that's really a high trend right now, that a high renaissance in psychedelic therapy, psychedelic assisted therapy, you could say. And I think you see some of the same long-lasting effects from that as you see in near-death experiences. And I think if I should try to translate that to Martinus, as you mentioned, on these divine glimpses, or what you use cosmic glimpses, which is, I think, basically what you get through that psychedelic assisted therapy, right? Yeah.
You can get it in a chemical way. You could
You
say
get
you
it in a chemical way, yes,
open up and
exactly. And I think
yes. And it's very important there to stress that it's a very big difference from the 60s when they started with LSD therapy, and some people crashed and went schizophrenic. And now, as you said, it's just a part of a therapeutic process.
yes,
They integrate very small doses of these.
Yeah.
It's not
Yes,
like
exactly.
in the 60s and when the LSD came out.
yeah.
So,
And I think you're also hinting at a really, really important point, that is, what is the commonality between these experiences, right? I mean, what
yes,
is the commonality in a slow spiritual development, or in the near-death experiences, or in the reincarnation thoughts, or in, say, clairvoyancy or paranormal phenomenon, or I mean, there are numerous also well-researched areas, right? That points to a certain truth, I guess, right?
yes.
If I could be so free to say that, and that is that consciousness is the primary thing,
Yes,
and that has numerous ways of showing itself.
yes.
It can reveal itself in numerous experiences, numerous perceptions, and then we call those perceptions, those experiences, we call them different things. And that is also a very scientific thing that's really not really true, but it's the way that we approach the world. We put it into small things, so we think we can understand it better. So we think that near-death experiences is one thing, and out-of-body experience is another thing, and sleep paralysis is a third thing, and all these things are basically just variations of the same phenomenon, in my humble view. In my personal view.
I remember Pim van Lommel, who wrote the book about beyond, what was this book called, Life Beyond Consciousness or something like that. He described Martinus's experience of cosmic consciousness as a near-death experience. And of course, Martinus wasn't approaching death when he had that spiritual experience. But the quality of the experience is related, at least.
Yes.
Like he opened up for a larger perspective. He saw that he had that he was an eternal being. He had lived many times, and felt this connection with a much greater being, and a completely comprehensive being, which the religions describe as God. So he felt related to all living beings, and that the only thing that mattered was that we learn to love one another. But I was rather surprised when I heard Pim van Lommel saying that, that was a near-death experience. But it matches what you're saying, Tobias, that these experiences, we could call them all spiritual experiences, really, but they just happen in different circumstances.
And it must point out a dimension that is a real dimension. It's not fantasies, it's not hallucinations. It is really something. It is a factual aspect in the consciousness that could be experienced and you could come closer to this in different ways. So it's not something just for fantasy or hallucinations. It is really a fact that there is a part of the consciousness that you can describe and see, as you said, through history, all cultures and all different types of spiritual experiences. They point to the same thing. There is a spiritual dimension. And I mean, many of these near-death scientists, as Pim van Lommel, they make also the conclusion that that is the most probable explanation of the near-death experiences, is that there is a possibility that you can experience life outside of the physical body. And as I said before, they call the brain a filter for the greater consciousness.
It is both a probable and a loving and a rational conclusion. Yes.
Yes.
How do you think, Søren, that the reincarnation theory is kind of related? Where do you see the relationship to near-death experiences most strongly?
Well, I've listened to many near-death experiences on YouTube, for instance.
Mm.
And so many of them are also talking about that they see past lives.
Yeah.
And even future lives.
Yes.
And they are, they even say that, which is a little bit tricky for me, but they say that they all are on the same time. And I think that's very interesting, because here in the physical realm, we are in time and space.
Yes.
But when you are outside of this realm, then you experience there is no time and space. And many of these experiences, they say that it felt like 100 years, but it was only 5 minutes at the operation board. So time and space is something totally different than we think. And in fact, we also know that from quantum physics,
Yes.
with entanglement, with these particles that may have wide space between them, but they act exactly at the same time, that there is a dimension where you can communicate without being bound by the speed of light. Or
Yes.
so there is another dimension. And I think it is interesting to see when you are in that dimension, you don't experience time and space. It's all simultaneously.
Yes.
From my perspective, it cannot be simultaneously, but
Yes.
that's the way you experience it.
Yes.
And I think that's so interesting.
Very.
That is, if we sit here now and I say to you, Tobias, would you please move your consciousness to be aware of your clinic? You can do that immediately. Then you are at the clinic.
Yes.
With your thought. And I think that's also what happens when you are in the spiritual realm. You can just move your focus and you will be in another space, in another time.
Yes.
So you can move freely in time and space, but that is not for me the same thing as that everything is happening simultaneously.
No.
So
No.
that's a very tricky question that is always coming up in these experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
And-
it's sorry, Mary.
And I think too that people often talk about experiencing a life review during near-death experiences. Like they can experience their whole life up to that point in time in what on Earth, so to speak, is maybe a minute or 2 minutes or a very, very short time, but they've experienced maybe 30 years or 50 years or 70 years or whatever in an instant, but they've experienced every detail and the content, the essential essence of every moment of their lives. So that also gives rise to questions about time and space.
Yes.
Yes, and I think there's it's really obviously it's a valid question, and I think you can, as you say, I can move my thoughts to my clinic instantly, and I think, I mean, the faculty of moving your consciousness to different places and perceiving things in different spaces, I think that's a faculty that can be trained as well.
Yes.
So I think that's most certainly possible. And then mostly I think that the comprehension of time and space as something that is not really true, that's something that's not really, that really doesn't exist, I think that is beyond the human experience, to be honest. I mean, we cannot comprehend this. It's impossible for us with this body, with this machine that we have in this world, in this time and space that we're sharing right here on Zoom, the Martinus Institute podcast. We don't have the faculties necessary to really comprehend that time and space doesn't exist. And I just think that's just a fact that we will have to accept.
I think
It's really difficult, and we can get glimpses of it, as you mentioned. Like we can get cosmic glimpses that this is actually the true state of things. But it is not something that most people have in their everyday conscious experience.
I think that's very interesting, because we have been, as I see it, through reincarnation, been gathering a lot of experiences, lifetime after lifetime, and it's also gathered in our super consciousness as a competence emotionally and skills of different kinds.
Yes.
And all these experiences are from time and space. So how could you believe that there is a place where it's not time and space?
Yeah.
because all your experiences say the opposite. So I can really understand when we have the last 100 years been working with our intelligence, with natural science, and measured and weighed everything, that we can have a proof this is time and space. It's true. Because we have buried ourselves in all these experiences of matter. But it's interesting to see that there is another faculty that can experience outside of time and space. And when we get these glimpses, it's kind of this intuitive knowledge. And there I think it's interesting that Martinus stresses that the evolution of mankind is towards neighborly love. We are much more loving and have much more humane activities today than the Viking had. They had the ideal to be the strongest, and we have the ideal that we shall help people in Gaza or whatever when people are hurt. And he says that when this compassion is growing from lifetime through suffering, which is the purpose of suffering, humaneness will come to a level where it will open for the intuitive. So that is the sum of all these experiences of time and space will create a new faculty of intuition. And that's what we are heading for. So in that way, it's a very optimistic way of looking at life and suffering and problems we're going through. It's gathered and it's growing, and it will create a humane faculty.
Yeah, and I think also that I mean, I mentioned in the beginning that I think balance is really one of the most important things in the human experience, so to say, because there's, because in my view, it's not an either or. It's actually it's a both and. So
absolutely,
the thing is, it is both true that time and space doesn't exist. And it is similarly true that time and space does exist. It can be true at the same time. And I think that's really one of the main leaps that you have to conduct with your consciousness, right? That these things can actually be true at the same time. And if you accept that, then they can mutually enhance each other, right?
So we're living in two worlds at the same time, really. You could say.
That is also a really good question. I think we can only live in one world, right? But it has many variations. It has many ways of showing itself to us.
Yes.
I was thinking of things like talents and so on. I have worked a lot with musicians, and we talk a lot about talent, but who's ever seen a talent? You can't see a talent. But if you give me a violin, I can show you how little talent I have for playing it. But I mean, I have some talent. I did train as a violinist. but all these talents that people talk about, and they're invisible. They have no physical place. You can't look at someone and measure their talent, but you can see it manifested. So there's a whole sort of non-physical dimension.
Mary, you have worked with prodigy. What is it? Child prodigies, haven't you?
Child prodigies. Yes, I have.
Yes. So you have seen this, and I guess that has influenced your way of looking at reincarnation, I guess.
Yeah, because I worked with these very small children from 2.5, mostly from 3 years old, who played the violin, and remember a 4-year-old who started, and it's a long story, but I mean, she in 1 week she had learned to play the first 5 pieces on a tape I gave her, and totally perfectly in tune, and rhythm was perfect. The technique was all awkward because she didn't know quite how to hold the instrument, and in less than a year she played a Vivaldi violin concerto at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in London, and a year later she played a Bach violin concerto, and when she was 7 she went to the Yehuda Menuhin school outside London, which is a school for child prodigies.
Wow, so, I'm getting goosebumps from your story.
You do? Yeah.
Yes.
But I've worked with a lot of children who have that kind of talent. And one thing that's interesting too is that some of them, actually this little girl I'm talking about now, she won a very, very prestigious competition when she was 18. And she packed her violin in its case and she said, well, that's it. Now I want to study sociology.
Perfect. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I worked with a 15-year-old boy, a pianist, and he'd had his debut with a professional symphony orchestra as a soloist when he was 12. And at the age of 15, he was traveling abroad to play the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto, which is one of the most difficult piano concertos you can imagine. But I could see he was a bit troubled, and he said, yeah, I sort of been there, done that. I want to make robots, he said.
Yes.
He wanted to be a robot engineer. So, and of course, that
Wonderful.
was very much against his family's wishes, but he ended up going to MIT to study robot engineering. So it's been very interesting for me to see that these children who have these enormous talents, and everything is so easy for them. They learn things so
Yes.
quickly. But they reach an age when it's sort of over and done with, some of them at least.
Yeah.
And the ones who are really interested, and it's not that easy for them, they're building up a talent and they work on it and work on it and they'll work on it through their whole lives. But I imagine that you can come back in your next life and you have a talent with you. So
Yes, and I think your story also just goes to tell that we have different purposes when we come here, right?
yes,
And I think especially as children, and I can see that on my daughter, she's almost 1.5 years old, right? And I mean, consciousness is just flowing so unhindered through children, right? Because they are so close to the source that they came from. So I can really understand how talent can manifest so easily in small kids like that. I think that's quite fascinating.
And
Yeah.
as you
Quite
say, how
fascinating.
open their consciousness is also for the spiritual world.
Yes, yes.
And I guess a lot of these friends they have that you don't see, that they can really be a reality. Our daughter, when she was about 4 years old, we had a friend that passed away, and she suddenly, when she was nearly way to fall asleep, she said bye-bye to this person that had died. She didn't know she was dead, but she waved and said bye-bye and said her name. I think that was really also showing that, okay, maybe it's much closer than we believe, this other realm.
I think so too.
And I think just a final point to wind up was my own sense as a music student when I was a teenager was that I practiced all I could. And I had a friend and she practiced all she could. But she was always better than me. And it wasn't just a feeling of ordinary jealousy. Maybe there was something of that, but it was more a sense of not understanding it. Like, where's the justice in life if I can't be as good as I want to be?
Yes.
At least, and can't be as good as fast as I want to be, and as good as the others. So I think all these near-death experiences and the thought of reincarnation, they contribute to my sense of justice in life. Like, if this is not the only life you have, I mean, if you're born in the middle of a war zone where the hospital is being bombed and the doctors are dead, and and that's the only life you get, where's the justice in that? But if it's like having a bad day in the series of a whole life, then it makes more sense to me. So I think I think the idea of reincarnation satisfies my need for justice in life. Also, when it's, I mean, in all perspectives, but including the perspective of talents. Yeah, I think we're running out of time. Is there anything you would like to say, either of you, to wind up?
That's one thing I think about these tellings about near-death experiences. In our time now, when there are all these wars and problems going on, I think it is also comforting to hear these stories when they say that when they die, they go over to another realm. And it's when we now hear about all these people dying in Gaza, for example, if we can have this imagination that, okay, their bodies are dying, but they are going over into the light, it can be kind of comforting, because it's so hard to see the world in this situation.
Yeah.
But I think all these experiences from these near-death experiences, they show us that it's not the end, it's a beginning of something new. And I think that's very comforting to think about that.
Yes, yes, very, very much so. And they, most of them, they really look forward to going back, right? They know it's not, they can only go back when it's that time. But and they, most of them, they don't believe in life after death. They know it's there. That's how they
Yes.
word it. And I think that's very comforting as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much, Tobias Anker Stripp and Søren Grint, for guesting our podcast today. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bye for now.